I want to ask you a question. Where do giants and monsters go to party? In those alien lands far removed from human touch and beyond mortal sight, an other world, a dreamland, a fairy realm, all which lie across the distant sea, or a foggy island with an elder's portal. So who hunts monsters and alien gods? Players, heroes, and villains, which means you might find a table near you needing such a piece of terrain. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to create one version of the Eldritch with some otherworldly stylings that just might give off the right vibes for your table. Starting with the foundations of this misty island, I knew there were three things that I wanted to achieve. One, I wanted to reuse as much material as possible. Two, I wanted to play with the theme of the Giant's Causeway and the basalt columns as an integral part of this build. And three, color, all the drip. Reuse of material was a imperative. The base of this island had already been built during the building phase for the Nightmare waterfront and then abandoned when I wanted to experiment with some other parts in the waterfront itself and then get back to this island part. So I already had this pretty nicely shaped landmass. I just need a little bit of work. The board it's sitting on came from a failed experiment expanding that massive vine entrance. It would just need to be covered with some texture to hide the remnants of my failure, but otherwise it was pretty much close to the size of what I actually needed. The basalt columns are the real stars here. These are very simple to cut out of any chunk of foam, and the larger ones only need to be sliced in half or have only half a face even carved into a smaller piece of foam to act as a facade. All of these come together with just a bit of hot glue and a big old block of balsa wood just slammed down. Should note, also reused from my grandfather's shed after he passed, and I quickly had the very rough idea of an island. With a bit of sculptamold and some coffee grounds, these are enough textures to blend the basalt columns with the original island piece and the ground. The island itself, the goal here is to make it look like the pillars rise up and they pushed this chunk of earth up and out of the muck, and the muck is slowly sliding down the sides of these basalt columns, kind of eroding away in that molten, melty, almost dreamlike state. Then comes the decoration. Starts off with some very typical for this nightmare terrain I've been building, that brain textured fan flowers, and then some of these broad-leafed upright bush clusters, just to add a little bit of continuity to the piece. Not enough to overwhelm the basalt columns themselves or to get in the way of playability. Later on, I ended up adding some cotton balls as some spider nests that would be added once the whole thing was completely painted. The resin would be later poured just in small amounts to create some shallow pools to really sell the idea of wetness for some of this ground area. Keeping in mind that the idea is that these columns rose up and took this island with it. So you can assume that all around, the entirety of the ground lifted up. And so the water would have pulled away from this island. So let's talk painting. There are two stages to painting Cthullu Party Island. The ground and the island itself are all going to get a dark blue base. Then a coat of gray, and then some lighter gray, and then a very, very light dry brushing of white to finish off the stone that is not these basalt columns. Making sure to really highlight some of those areas on the back of the model where that flagstone has been embedded into the wall. So we've got some decent looking stone, but the theme of this island is on a kind of mud flat, so we're going straight to the browns. The lowest areas of the build on the flat board, or these coffee textured areas, are going to get a brown and then a tan highlight over top. Not much, just the light dry brushing, because this brown is the key to this build. Recall the idea of the basalt columns rising up. That means you're going to have more of these browns in the flat, and they're going to be working their way down. So we're going to use the brown as a blending color in a way, in addition to our washes. Speaking of stone, let's talk about the stars of the show. You, the viewer. Thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, why not drop a like on the video and subscribe if you want to come to this Cthulhu Island party bash. And I really do appreciate everyone who views these videos and finds something interesting about them. The basalt columns. These boys are brilliant. Well done, me. They're easy to build, they take texture nicely, and they look pretty kick-ass. As is. But why let them rest there? Let's go further. Let's go higher. Let's go madder. It starts with the same coat of that dark blue to tie in the basalt to the rest of the build. But unlike the other stones, we're going to go in a different direction. Which brings us to the key ingredient. Scale 75, white alchemy. A very, very interesting white enamel quartz looking paint that has this very interesting reflective quality to it. In theory, the white alchemy should show through anything that is painted over it, with the focus on the edges being the more pure white alchemy. That's going to mean a heavy dry brush of the white alchemy over all of these basalt columns, again keeping that focus on the edges. This brings us to the prismatic effects. This is in theory easy. In practicality, however, turned out to be quite tedious. First, I ended up picking 4 very bright colors that I wanted to work into these columns. In this case, a bright red, green, a yellow, and a pink. Each of these colors is then mixed with a little bit of white alchemy, and then dry brush on one color at a time, constantly moving back and forth between colors and columns to ensure that no single column has too dominant of a tint from any single color, but to make sure that each color exists in different volumes on each of these columns to the best of my ability. The additional white alchemy in these bright paints adds this otherworldly sheen, if you will, and over the flat side of these columns, it creates some interesting colors and what almost looks like smears or streaks across that really capture some of that light texturing that you might not otherwise get. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Being careful not to overdo. It's very easy to end up with columns that are predominantly one color and you need to go back and pull that back with some of the other colors, which is why we're going to apply a wash to these. For this case, I decided to use a very simple purple and a dark brown. The brown is going to tie the basalt to the ground texture, and the texture of the areas below the water. The purple we're going to use as a kind of shadow, very much something to push into the cracks and crevices and to tint some of those very bright colors back towards the blue side, blue palette, if you will. And that'll help by also tying it into the color palette of the island, where we've used browns and a few blues here and there, a little bit of purple, to add some washes previously. Nightmare plants then are going to get a green fleshy color, then a wash of red, and then just a quick dry brush of bone to make them a little bit different from the plants that have been built in the earlier sets. Presumably those are in like a drier climate, and these are something maybe what happens when these plants are exposed to a lot more moisture. The final step of building is some nice resin over what is intended to be pools, if you will, almost like tidal pools. This resin was just tinted a little brown and then poured into those deepest pools. The trick here is just let that resin sit and just maybe work with it slowly up until that kind of working time on whatever brand you use is kind of up. And since about 10 minutes in, I was able to very much manipulate this resin without having it slide off my board. And by being careful with the sculptamold, it was very simple to actually keep the resin inside the piece and not have it leak out. For once, no spills. And there we have it, a kick-ass basalt column with a prismatic paint job perfect for any nightmare or wizard's lair. And a very large base for a very special model. Yes, this is only part 1, and there is going to be an object that goes on top of Cthulhu's Party Island, which I've already previewed on my Instagram. But we'll be getting to that soon. Out of all the Nightmare Terrain sets that I've built, this one very much captures the feel and remains the most playable of the Nightmare Terrain, in my opinion, by really pulling back on that decoration. But tell me what you think. Where does this one stand in relation to all the other members, let's call it, of this set? Enjoy the gallery shots with some cool group shots of all this Nightmare Terrain, and remember to subscribe and like for some more.